When my husband Michael announced his week-long business trip, I didn't protest. I simply nodded with the quiet resignation of someone who had learned that silence serves far better than discussion. What caught me off guard wasn't his departure. It was his insistence that I stay with his parents while he was away. "It would do them good to have you there," he'd said, as though my presence were some healing balm for their solitude, a duty I was expected to fulfill. He never once wondered what it might do to me. This wasn't my first visit to their home, but it was the first time I'd be staying longer than a polite overnight visit. These would be days, entire days within that stately Savannah house where soaring ceilings met rich mahogany and antique clocks still announced each passing hour with melodic chimes. In that house, time moved differently, more intimately, more inclined to unveil the secrets that modern life's constant noise usually conceals. Before we cross that threshold into a week that would transform everything, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support enables me to continue sharing these intricate, deeply human stories. Margaret, his mother, welcomed me with the practiced warmth of a woman from a generation that expressed love through restrained, subtle gestures. She prepared tea with movements that spoke of gentle, unassuming grace, then led me to the guest room on the second floor, positioned directly beside her husband's study. Then there was Charles, my father-in-law. He greeted me with the polite, measured courtesy reserved for guests not expected to overstay their welcome. He possessed an understated elegance, impeccable manners, and a quiet intelligence that commanded respect. He was the type of man who still opened doors for women, pulled out their chairs at dinner, and wielded silence not as an absence of words, but as an instrument of careful observation. The first 2 days passed with deceptive tranquility. We shared breakfast in the sun-drenched dining room, where I enjoyed long, wandering conversations with Margaret as we strolled through her lush, overgrown garden. She spoke of her youth, of how dramatically the world had changed. Each evening, she would retire early, leaving Charles and me in the expansive living room, a space of gleaming wood and deep shadows where he would read beneath a solitary lamp's warm glow. On the third night, the house's rhythm shifted. I had ventured downstairs for water, my bare feet soundless against the cool hardwood. The house lay wrapped in profound silence, broken only by the gentle whisper of wind through the ancient live oaks and the steady, patient tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hallway. As I passed the living room, I discovered Charles sitting alone in darkness, a glass of red wine cradled in his hand, staring at the cold, empty fireplace as if its ashes held life's deepest truths. "Can't sleep?" I asked, my voice a gentle intrusion into the stillness. "Sometimes sleep eludes us," he replied, his voice a low murmur. He didn't turn to face me. I approached hesitantly, feeling like a specter in my own existence. He offered neither invitation nor dismissal, so I settled at the far end of the lengthy sofa, maintaining a careful distance dictated by unspoken boundaries. "Does the house's silence disturb you?" he asked, his gaze remaining fixed on the fireplace. "No," I answered, startled by my own candor. "Sometimes I prefer it. It's as though the house reveals more when no one is speaking." Then he looked at me, truly looked at me for the first time, with a slow, deliberate attention I hadn't anticipated. "You listen well," he observed. Few people possess that gift. I wasn't certain how to interpret his words. It wasn't a compliment, in any conventional sense. It was an observation, a form of recognition, a validation. "And what do you hear in this silence?" I dared to ask. He contemplated the question, swirling the wine thoughtfully in his glass. "Things I don't dare speak aloud," he finally whispered. He finally answered, turning his gaze back to the empty hearth. In that moment, I stopped feeling like an invited guest, an obligation. I felt present, truly present. Nothing else happened that night, No other words were exchanged, but the silence that followed was different from the silences of previous evenings. This one was heavier, more charged. It was electric. I returned to my room with the glass of water still clutched in my hand, and the unsettling feeling that in that old, slumbering house, something between the walls was beginning to awaken. The next morning it dawned warm and clear. The three of us shared breakfast together, sunlight streaming through the large windows, acting as if the previous night hadn't left traces of something new and unspoken suspended in the air. Margaret spoke with her usual sweetness about her garden, the neighbors, the relentless passage of time. Charles, concealed behind his coffee cup, would nod or murmur in elegant agreement. And I pretended to be normal with the practiced mastery of someone who has learned to silence the things that beat too loudly in her own chest. The day passed without incident. We strolled through Savannah's historic squares, enjoyed lunch on the backyard patio, and even laughed. But every time I looked at him, every time my eyes met Charles's, I felt something different. It was as if he knew, as if we both knew, that we were no longer the same as we had been just the day before. Our most mundane words now carried a second, hidden meaning, a secret conversation unfolding just beneath the surface of our everyday phrases. What do you think was happening in those shared glances? Was it just a lonely woman's imagination, or was a genuine, unspoken connection forming? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. In the afternoon, Margaret went to visit a neighborhood friend. She apologized with her customary grace, assuring us she wouldn't be long. She left me alone in the house with him. I was in the kitchen preparing mint tea when I saw him walk toward his study. He held a book in his hand, but his gait seemed slower than usual, more deliberate, as if he were waiting for something. I don't know what prompted me, what invisible thread pulled me from the kitchen, but after a few minutes I found myself walking to the door of his study. It was slightly ajar, an invitation. I knocked gently on the dark wood. "Can I come in?" He raised his eyes from his book and nodded, gesturing toward the worn leather armchair positioned in front of his imposing desk. "Please." I entered. The atmosphere inside was hushed, filled with that warm gloom that invites the lowering of one's voice. The room smelled of old books, of wood and ink and time. We sat in silence for several seconds, as if we were both measuring the gravity of that simple gesture, me being there alone with him by my own choice. "Reading something interesting?" I asked, gesturing to the book in his hand. "Something I used to enjoy," he replied, setting it down. "But lately I find that books don't hold my attention as much as people do." The phrase fell slowly without a hint of flirtation. It sounded more like a confession. "You don't like being alone?" "Sometimes I do, but lately, no. Lately I've come to realize that not all loneliness is cured with silence." He looked at me then, a slow, penetrating gaze as if he were searching for an answer beyond my words. "And you," he added softly, "are you happy with my son?" I could have lied. I could have smiled brightly and diverted the subject with practiced ease. But something in his voice, in that direct yet gentle way he asked, disarmed me. It made me want to be honest for the first time in a very long time. "Not always," I said, the words tasting strange and true on my tongue. "Sometimes I feel like we're living two separate lives that only intersect out of commitment." He nodded slowly, not with surprise, but with a deep, resonant understanding. "That happens to many people," he said quietly. "The difference is in who dares to accept it," he said quietly. He didn't ask for more details, didn't insist or pry. He simply stood, went to a small tray on a side table, and offered me a cup of tea he had poured for himself. I accepted it. And there, sitting face to face in the quiet sanctity of his study, something more delicate than romance began to unfold between us. An intimacy without a name. We talked for more than an hour. We spoke of life, of the past, of the paths we take without knowing if they are truly our own or simply ones we've inherited. There were no daring gestures, no loaded words, only two, people sharing the type of comfortable silence that doesn't demand to be filled, the kind that envelops and soothes. But when I rose to leave, something happened. I leaned forward to place my empty cup on his desk, and in that brief, fleeting moment, our hands brushed against each other. For a second that stretched into eternity, neither of us pulled away. He looked at me. I looked at him. There was no kiss, no declaration, but that simple, accidental touch was more than just physical contact. It was silent permission, a door pushed open without sound. I left his study slowly, my body feeling strangely light on the stairs. My heart beat a hard, frantic rhythm against my ribs. In my mind, a single phrase repeated itself like a mantra. There are people who are supposed to mean nothing, but they end up becoming the one place where something inside you can finally breathe again. After that afternoon in the study, something fundamental in me shifted. It wasn't visible on the surface. No one would have noticed. Margaret returned from her visit, smiling as always. Charles went back to reading his newspaper with that same studied calm. And I simply became more aware of every detail, of every accidental brush of our shoulders when passing in the corridor, of every lingering look exchanged during breakfast, of every word he said to me without speaking, at all. The next day was a kind of silent, intricate dance. We didn't seek each other out, but we found each other over and over again. In the kitchen, reaching for the same cabinet. In the garden, admiring the same blooming rose. We moved around each other carefully, avoiding any overt contact, only to find ourselves drawn together again by some invisible magnetic force. That night, Margaret went to sleep early. We heard her climb the stairs, her footsteps soft and paused, followed by the slight creak of the wooden floor above us. I was in the living room tidying up, picking up the remnants from the evening snack. He appeared in the doorway in silence. "Do you need help?" he asked. "I'm fine, thank you," I answered. But I didn't move. I stood still, waiting. He came closer, not too close, just enough for me to feel his presence behind me, a warmth that seemed to radiate through the cool air. He didn't make a gesture, didn't touch anything. He just said, his voice low and strained, "This isn't right." "I know," I whispered back, my voice trembling slightly. "But I don't want to keep denying it." I turned around slowly, and there we were, him with his tired eyes that were suddenly so full of life, me trembling from head to toe but feeling more awake than I had in years. We didn't need to say anything else because it wasn't necessary. We approached each other without urgency, without scandal. We moved with the simple, inevitable nature of two people who have already been in that silent, intimate space of repressed emotion. And then it happened. It was not a desperate, passionate caress, nor a gesture of fleeting madness. It was a contained kiss, long, deep. It was one of those kisses that doesn't seek the body but the soul. A kiss that doesn't ask for permission, but doesn't force its way in either. When it ended, we didn't separate completely. Our foreheads rested against each other. "It won't happen again," he whispered. I said the words, a lie we both needed to hear. "I know," he answered, but we both knew that what we had said held none of the power of what we had just done. We retreated to our separate rooms. I closed my door with trembling hands, sat on my bed, and stayed there in the silence, staring at nothing. I didn't cry. I didn't reproach myself. I only understood that life is full of moments we do not plan. Moments that change us irrevocably from the inside out. Sometimes a single night, a single kiss, can say more than a marriage has said in years. The following days passed as if the world were determined to return everything to its proper place. The house regained its serene, placid rhythm. Breakfasts, with fresh flowers on the table, soft, meaningless conversations, classical music playing softly in the kitchen. Charles and I acted as if nothing had happened, and perhaps on the outside there was nothing to reveal. But inside, I was no longer the same person, and neither was he. We greeted each other with the same courtesy, shared a table, coffee, and silence. But now in each glance there was something new and contained, a kind of promise that would never be spoken, but that tied us together more strongly than any words ever could. My husband returned on a Friday afternoon, his suitcase full of cheap souvenirs and his voice full of stories that did not include me. He kissed my forehead, a perfunctory gesture, like someone remembering a task on a checklist. I hugged him like someone who appreciates the intention, even if her soul is in another room entirely. There were no suspicions, no signs, because the truest betrayals, the ones that wound without leaving a visible trace, are not seen, they're felt. I said goodbye to my in-laws on Sunday evening. Margaret hugged me tenderly, oblivious. Charles shook my hand, his grip firm and gentle, his eyes looking at me for a second longer than was normal. He said nothing. I said nothing. But in the brief pressure of his fingers against mine, in the calm acceptance in his gaze, I knew that our story would not need any more chapters. It needed only the memory of one real moment found inside a borrowed life. Today, when I look back on that week, I don't punish myself. I don't judge it, because sometimes what happens between two people isn't infidelity, it's recognition. It's that fleeting, miraculous second where two lonely souls meet, understand each other, and then respectfully let each other go without anger, without scandal. Although I will never look at him in the same way again, I will always remember what it felt like to look at him and feel, for one brief shining moment, truly, completely alive. Sometimes love doesn't destroy, it only awakens. And when it happens in silence, it hurts, but it also heals. So I ask you, what would you do if someone made you feel in seconds what you have been waiting years to feel? Where does infidelity truly begin if the soul is no longer where it is, supposed to be? Tell me in the comments, was this a mistake, or was it a necessary act of humanity between two people who understood each other precisely when they needed it most? Subscribe if you appreciate real, human, and emotionally intense stories. Like this video if you've ever felt something you couldn't explain but could never forget. And share this with someone who understands that not everything you feel can be said out loud.